There was a time in Daniel's life when almost everything he did was quietly shaped by one simple question that never left his mind, a question so deeply rooted in his thoughts that he didn't even realize how much control it had over him. What will people think? It wasn't something he said out loud. It wasn't something anyone taught him directly. But somehow, over the years, it became the center of how he lived his life. Daniel lived in a quiet countryside town, the kind of place where life moved slowly, where mornings began with soft sunlight spreading across open fields, and evenings ended with long conversations under fading skies, where people knew each other not just by name, but by habits, stories, and small details that seemed insignificant yet carried meaning. In such places, opinions mattered, not loudly, but constantly. From a young age, Daniel learned that being liked made life easier. When he agreed with people, they smiled. When he stayed quiet, there were no problems. When he adjusted himself, he was accepted. And slowly, without even noticing it, Daniel began shaping himself into someone who fit perfectly into everyone else's expectations. If his friends laughed at something, he laughed too, even when he didn't find it funny. If someone criticized another person, he nodded, even when something inside him disagreed. If people expected him to behave a certain way, he followed without question, believing that peace was more important than honesty. At first, it felt harmless. In fact, it felt like the right thing to do. After all, he wasn't hurting anyone. He was being polite. He was being kind. He was being agreeable. But there was something he didn't realize. Every time he ignored his own thoughts, every time he chose approval over truth, every time he silenced himself just to avoid discomfort, a small part of who he really was became quieter. And over time, that quietness turned into something deeper, something heavier, something he couldn't quite explain. Years passed, and Daniel grew into someone everyone appreciated. People described him as easygoing, respectful, reliable. He was the kind of person others felt comfortable around, the kind of person who never caused trouble, the kind of person who always fit in. But there was one thing no one ever said about him. No one ever said they truly knew him. Because the truth was, Daniel himself didn't know who he really was anymore. There were moments, late at night, when everything around him became silent, when the noise of the day faded away, and there was nothing left but his own thoughts, that he felt something unusual, a strange emptiness, not painful enough to panic, but deep enough to notice. He would sit alone, sometimes staring at nothing, sometimes holding his phone without really using it, sometimes replaying small moments from the day, wondering why something felt off. But just like everything else, he pushed those thoughts aside. "There's nothing wrong," he would tell himself. "I'm just tired." And then he would move on. Until one evening, something small happened. Something so ordinary that no one else paid attention to it. But for Daniel, it became the beginning of everything. There was a gathering in town, a simple event where people came together, shared food, told stories, and enjoyed the comfort of familiar company. Daniel was there, as always, moving between conversations, smiling, listening, adjusting himself to match the energy of whoever he was with. At one point, a group of people nearby started joking about someone who wasn't present. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, it was casual, the kind of humor people often excuse. Daniel stood there, listening. Something inside him felt uncomfortable. He didn't find it funny. In fact, he didn't agree with it at all. But then something automatic happened. He laughed, not because he wanted to, not because he meant it, but because that's what everyone else was doing. And in that exact moment, as the sound of his own laughter reached his ears, something inside him shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden realization, no big reaction, just a quiet thought. Why did I laugh? That question followed him home. That night, as he sat alone, the moment replayed in his mind again and again. Not because it was important to anyone else, but because it revealed something he could no longer ignore. For the first time, he didn't push the thought away. He stayed with it. And slowly, another question appeared. If I didn't mean it, why did I do it? The answer wasn't immediate. But deep down, he already knew. Because he didn't want to stand out. Because he didn't want to disagree. Because he didn't want people to see him differently. Because he wanted to be liked. And for the first time in his life, that realization didn't feel comfortable. It felt heavy. Over the next few days, Daniel began noticing things he had never paid attention to before. Small moments, tiny reactions, automatic behaviors. He noticed how quickly he adjusted his opinions, depending on who he was talking to. How often he stayed silent when he actually had something to say. How easily he changed himself, just to avoid the smallest chance of disapproval. It was like seeing his own life from the outside for the first time. And then came the question that changed everything. It was like seeing his own life from the outside for the first time. And then came the question that changed everything. Who am I? When no one is watching. He didn't have an answer. Days passed. Nothing dramatic happened. Life continued as usual. But inside, something had already begun to change. Then, one day, it happened again. Another conversation. Another joke. Another moment where everyone expected him to react the same way he always had. But this time, he didn't. He didn't laugh. There was a brief silence. A small pause that felt much longer than it actually was. Someone looked at him and said, "What's wrong? You don't find it funny?" Daniel hesitated for a second. That familiar feeling returned. The urge to adjust, to fix the moment, to go back to being who everyone expected him to be. But this time, he didn't follow it. He simply said, "No, I don't." It was a small sentence, but it felt like something much bigger. For the first time, he chose honesty over approval. That was the day Daniel stopped trying to impress people, not completely, not perfectly, but intentionally. And at first it wasn't easy. People noticed. Some questioned him. Some felt uncomfortable. Some even distanced themselves. "You've changed. You're different now. You used to be more fun." Daniel didn't argue. He didn't try to explain. Because for once, he wasn't trying to convince anyone. He was just being honest. Weeks turned into months. And something unexpected happened. Some people left his life. But the ones who stayed started seeing him differently. Not as someone who always agreed, but as someone who was real. And slowly, Daniel began to feel something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not the kind that comes from avoiding problems, but the kind that comes from no longer pretending. He still smiled, still helped people, still lived a simple life. But now, it was real. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't living for people. He was living as himself. Some people spend their entire lives trying to be liked. But the moment you stop trying to impress everyone is the moment you finally meet yourself.